On September 19, 1777, Lieutenant General John Burgoyne led roughly 7,000 British and German regulars south along the Hudson River toward Albany. Burgoyne commanded one of the best-equipped armies Britain had ever sent to North America. Disciplined infantry, heavy artillery, full bayonet charges. He expected this campaign to end the rebellion outright. What his men found in the tree line instead was a weapon Britain's army had never bothered to take seriously. A homemade hunting rifle the British considered a frontier curiosity, not a battlefield threat. So how did a few hundred farmers and frontiersmen, armed with weapons their own commander-in-chief once doubted, help bring down an entire British army? By the late summer of 1777, the American war effort was in genuine danger of collapse. Britain's plan was simple and, on paper, devastating. 3 armies would converge on Albany, slicing New England away from the rest of the colonies and starving the rebellion of its most committed region. Burgoyne marched south from Quebec with around 8,000 men. Barry St. Leger pushed east through the Mohawk Valley. Sir William Howe was supposed to drive north from New York City to complete the pincer. Burgoyne's campaign had already gone well for him on paper. He'd taken Fort Ticonderoga in early July without a real fight, and chased the retreating Americans through the Vermont woods. But 2 things had quietly gone wrong. On August 16th, a foraging detachment of roughly 800 of Burgoyne's men was wiped out at the Battle of Bennington, costing him nearly 1,000 soldiers he couldn't replace. And Howe, inexplicably, had taken his army south to capture Philadelphia, instead of moving north to link up with Burgoyne at all. Burgoyne didn't know it yet, but he was marching toward Albany completely alone, his Native American scouts deserting by the week. His supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles into hostile country. The army that looked unstoppable from London looked, on the ground, like it was running out of road. The weapon that was about to humiliate that army didn't come from a royal armory or a state arsenal. It came from the workshops of German immigrant gunsmiths in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, starting in the early 1700s. Men like Martin Milan had brought over the short, heavy Jaeger hunting rifles of Central Europe and married that rifled barrel, the spiral grooves that spin a bullet for accuracy, to the long, slender stock of English fowling pieces. The result, refined over decades on the Pennsylvania and Virginia frontier, was a rifle that could put a ball into a man-sized target at 200 to 300 yards. The standard British infantry weapon, the smoothbore Brown Bess musket, was lucky to hit the same target past 80 yards, and most soldiers were trained to fire only at whites-of-the-eyes range. But the British Army didn't take it seriously, and for understandable reasons. The American long rifle couldn't mount a bayonet. It took nearly a minute to reload, compared to seconds for a musket. It was expensive, handmade, and useless in a mass volley exchange, the entire basis of 18th century European warfare. Even George Washington himself was skeptical. When Daniel Morgan first marched his Virginia Riflemen into camp outside Boston in August 1775, Washington found their loose discipline and rowdy behavior so embarrassing that he reportedly confided he wished the company had never come at all. A weapon British officers openly mocked as a backwoods toy, dismissed by the very general who would eventually rely on it. Daniel Morgan understood something European military thinking refused to accept. A rifle didn't need to win a stand-up volley exchange to be decisive. It just needed to be impossible to get close to. Morgan had spent his life on the frontier, fighting Indian style, ambush, concealment, picking targets rather than firing blind into a mass of men. He wasn't trying to out-musket the British. He was trying to make their entire style of fighting unworkable by killing the officers who held the lines together, from a range those officers couldn't shoot back from. By June 1777, Washington had formalized this idea. He pulled together a provisional rifle corps of roughly 500 hand-picked marksmen, drawn from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia regiments, many of them veterans of the brutal retreat across New Jersey, and gave command to Colonel Daniel Morgan, fresh out of British captivity after being taken prisoner at Quebec. In August, at General Horatio Gates's specific request, Washington sent this corps north to face Burgoyne, alongside Henry Dearborn's 300-man light infantry regiment for close support. Gates positioned Morgan's riflemen on the American left flank at Bemis Heights, a fortified ridge above the Hudson laid out by the Polish engineer Thaddeus Kosciuszko. The plan exploited exactly what the rifle was built for. Morgan's men were deployed in loose, scattered formation through dense forest and underbrush, not in the tight ranks European tactics demanded, but spread out, concealed, able to pick individual targets. Dearborn's infantry was placed close behind to provide covering fire and prevent the riflemen from being overrun once they revealed their positions, since a man who has just fired a rifle needs the better part of a minute to reload and is otherwise defenseless. Morgan gave specific standing instructions. Target officers first. Not the nearest man, not whoever's visible. The men on horseback. The men giving orders. The men whose uniforms and bearing marked them as leaders. He also reportedly used a distinctive turkey gobble call to relay signals through the woods without giving away rifleman positions through spoken commands. It was, in effect, a kill-the-command structure plan, built around a weapon that let it actually work at a range where the British couldn't return fire effectively. John Burgoyne, nicknamed Gentleman Johnny for his stylish uniforms and high living, had treated this entire campaign as a formality from the start. Before he even left London, he'd wagered his friend Charles James Fox £10 that he'd return from America victorious within the year. He saw the expedition as a stroll that would make him a national hero who'd single-handedly crushed the American rebellion. His army was a proper European force. Disciplined volley fire, fixed bayonets, artillery, the whole conventional package that had crushed armies across the continent for a century. Frontier riflemen, scattered in the trees and refusing to stand and fight in formation, weren't a serious military threat in Burgoyne's calculus. They were an irregular nuisance beneath the dignity of a real campaign. On October 7, 1777, with his supplies running low and no word from Howe or Clinton, Burgoyne decided he couldn't wait any longer. He sent out roughly 1,500 men in 3 columns on a reconnaissance in force, probing the American left directly into Morgan's position. Brigadier General Simon Fraser, one of Burgoyne's most respected and aggressive officers, led the British light infantry on the flank, conspicuous on a gray horse, riding up and down the line to rally his men. Benedict Arnold, watching from the American position, spotted him and turned to Morgan. "That man on the gray horse is a host unto himself," he said, "and has to be dealt with." Morgan sent his best marksmen forward. One of them, by long-standing tradition, a rifleman named Timothy Murphy, though the historical record genuinely can't confirm it was him specifically, climbed into a tree for a clear line of sight. From a range historians now estimate at roughly 300 yards, far beyond where any musket could have threatened him, the rifle fire found Fraser. He was hit through the body and fell from his horse. Without him, the rally that might have held the line simply didn't happen. The British light infantry broke and fell back toward their main position, and Arnold led a fresh American charge straight through the gap. By the time the smoke cleared at Bemis Heights, the British had lost roughly 600 men killed, wounded, or captured in a single afternoon, against American losses of around 150. It's the kind of lopsided ratio that historians still double-check, but the documentary record from both sides agrees on it. 10 days later, surrounded, out of food, and with no relief in sight, Burgoyne surrendered his entire remaining army, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 men, to General Gates. It was the first time in the war a complete British field army had laid down its arms. For comparison, it's a reversal on the scale of Hannibal's encirclement at Cannae, a numerically secure force walking into a trap built entirely around denying it the one thing it was designed to do. The surrender at Saratoga did far more than remove one army from the board. Word reached Benjamin Franklin in France within 2 months, and it was the proof King Louis XVI needed that the Americans could actually beat a British army in a real campaign, not just survive one. France signed a formal treaty of alliance in February 1778 and declared war on Britain the following month, bringing money, troops, and the French Navy into a war the Americans could not have won alone. Burgoyne himself never received another field command. He went home to a House of Commons inquiry and eventually a career as a moderately successful playwright. Today, the ground where Fraser fell is part of Saratoga National Historical Park, a quiet stretch of field and tree line above the Hudson River in upstate New York, walked by hikers and cyclists rather than soldiers. A 155-foot granite monument stands a few miles north, near the spot where Burgoyne's army finally laid down its weapons. The lesson Morgan's riflemen left behind outlasted the war itself. A weaker force doesn't need to match its enemy's strength to win. It only needs to make that strength irrelevant to the fight actually being had. 2.5 centuries later, the same idea still decides wars.